The title of the paper I will present here is The Permission of Nadir, Daime Religions and the Consistency of Relationships. In 2011, I witnessed the incorporation of the Preta Velha Nadir. Pretos Velhos and Pretas Velhas are spiritual entities of African slaves. Vó is grandmother. Nadir is a surname. So Vó Nadir helps in her spiritual work the young people from a community known as Barquinha. Barquinha is located in Rio Branco, Acre, Brazil, and is one of the Master Daniel Pereira de Matos' lineage of spiritist centers. Participants of Barquinha use Daime and organize themselves in an intense ritual religious life. Daime use spread among non-indigenous Brazilian population in the early 20th century, and its preparation is derived from the traditional use of ayahuasca in the Amazon basin. Vó Nadir participates in the spiritual work with the young in the community, and as the medium who incorporates the entity told me, she creates a special environment for these young people to take Daime, and focuses particularly on the various don'ts that they keep hearing from the adults and which would lead to conflict and frustration. The entity acted as a mediator for these conflicts, especially in their spiritual dimension, so to speak, that is, through the more intimate events that would take place. The young people would recur to the entity to talk about and figure out the vicissitudes of their relationships with parents and other adults. The most immediate repercussion of her work was not to promote a legitimization of these young people's complaints in relation to the adults, but to encourage them to use Daime to work through these difficulties. Regarding that Daime is considered to promote well-being based on its purgative properties, its stimulation of self-criticism and self-reflection, and with this capacity of mediate a relationship with the spiritual plans. I soon noticed that the entity's activity had ramifications that could be very sensitive in both intergenerational relations and in the daily life of the community. At that time, I filmed the incorporation, and indeed, a concern emerged a few months before the Breaking Convention 2013, when I was preparing my presentation called Daime Religions, Mediumship and Religious Agency, Health and the Influence of Social Relations. A few months before, on examining my field notes, I was sure I had already received permission from the mediums who organized the above-mentioned spiritual work with the community's youth to show them. However, when I was preparing the images to show, I realized that I had not asked for the permission of the spiritual entity herself. So I did not show the image and on the occasion, as I thought I should treat the entity with consistency. Later I realized that my preoccupation was the same of Marcelo Mercante. Mercante interviewed incorporate entities in the same center, and thus took his interlocutors seriously. It was also what I was trying to do. So in February 2015, I returned to Rio Branco to continue my research and to get that permission. The events that occurred in this fieldwork are the main subject of this paper. My aim, therefore, here is to raise issues on the don'ts and the do's that define and imbalance the fluency and the consistency of our lives, and especially in this case of the lives of Daime religions participants. Studies on plants of power, and particularly on the combination of them, ayahuasca, has focused on two major fields of approach. One of them is linked to the study of ritual, performance, and cosmology in their different aspects. The other looks into the biochemical neuropharmacological effects of the ayahuasca, and especially its therapeutic effects, for example, as an antidepressant. The former is generally associated with approach to ethnographic and ethnological aspects, especially from the field of studies of shamanism, and in the case of ayahuasca, the Amazonian influences. In this way, in South America, they attempt to cover both the indigenous and the so-called mestizo knowledge. Furthermore, along the same lines, they focus on investigating the ritual religious use, particularly associated with religions known as ayahuasqueras. It is relevant to remark that the latter run the risk of inadvertently contributing to the biomedicalization of ayahuasca and stimulated the activities of the pharmaceutical industry. To sum up, and in an attempt to encourage reflection through this work, it may not be necessary to construct an ethnology of the ayahuasca religions, but rather to research and analyze how the use of ayahuasca affects everyday life, in social relations, and the choices people make. Although I can't ignore the growing commercialization of Amazonian performing practices or to the almost inevitable biomedicalization of ayahuasca, my concern is contribute to another dimension of the life of ayahuasqueros, which I call relational, and for which the ritual religious use was constituted. Similarly, although I am not refractory to think that one day I could take an ayahuasca pill and have an antidepressive or even divinatory experience, I think that the ways of living related to one another that the ritualistic religious use of ayahuasca created is of great interest in our reflection on human possibilities. In this work, it is important to highlight that I try to address the search for Nadir's permission not as a task to be completed, but as a pretest to think about what had already been raised in the original paper, that of the Breaking Convention 2013. As relevant, I believe that there is a significant uneasiness among scholars of psychedelic consciousness regarding the religious use. From this point of view, I may remark that the good savage is a fictional future. This uneasiness probably comes perhaps from a problematic idea that it is needed to separate religious, ludic, and therapeutic use of psychoactive substances. But in fact, there is no possibility of saying that each use is exclusively religious or ludic or therapeutic or psychonautic. This perspective recognized, to say firstly, the highly interesting hypothesis by Peter Gall that there is in fact no way to establish a precise vector for the circulation of knowledge about ayahuasca in South America, whether it is spread from indigenous populations to the so-called mestizo populations or vice versa. And further, the argument of Brabec de Mori. He argues that there is no evidence of pre-Columbian use of ayahuasca. On the other hand, the historical and cosmological constitution of the religious organizations that adopted Daime in their ritual life responded to the historical conditions of their locality on one side and their founders' experiences on the other. In summary, it needs to be considered that these conditions responded to the ostensive presence of Christianity in the regions where the Daime religions flowered, or in the first non-indigenous populations from the border region between Brazil and Bolivia. To consider the unfolding of fieldwork events mentioned above, it is worth to address in this work the kinship relations that we find between participants in the Daime religions, linked to the Daniel Pereira de Matos lineage. Although it does not fall within the remit of this work to perform an ethnographic analysis of the kinship relations in Daime religions, I would like to point out that these organizations, and particularly the traditions associated with this lineage, could fit the exploratory analogy known to the concept of extended family, and which in the classic work by William Footwhite is defined as a system in which the social ideal is that various generations live under the same roof. The social and spatial dynamic reflects a sensation of accessibility, welcoming, associated, and connected to the encouragement of belonging. A complex system of communicability emerges in Barquinha in the sense of guiding participants in the spiritual work to occupy spaces in the different activities. So a permanent dislocation is expected, and sometimes it is related to the development of spiritual abilities. One sequence of events is relevant to think about my experience and to obtain the permission of Nadir. The relevance of the knowledge and experience of non-indigenous population which use the psychoactive sacrament Daime, the kinship relationships as an extended family, the various dislocations involved, the don'ts we get and the do's we expect among psychedelic consciousness related community. The narrative is based on the diary of my trip to Rio Branco, Acre, Brazil in February 2015. I traveled to Rio Branco to conclude some research project tasks on Daime religions and mental health and to ask for the permission of the entity. I arrived in Rio Branco in the early hours of the 25th of February. Looking for the medium that incorporated for Nadir in 2011, I went to the area around Vila Ivonete, where the three main Pereira de Matos lineage centers are located. Walking towards Barquinha, I noticed a participant in the center coming to my way, and I asked him about Nadir, and if the Preta Velha still served in the center. He told me that the medium had left the center and now attended the spiritual works in another center nearby. I prepared myself to participate in that night's spiritual work. It took place in the Centro Espírita Daniel Pereira de Matos. At the start of the work, I noticed that the medium I was looking for wasn't there. I joined the queue and took the Daime. Soon I started to feel uneasy. It became strong, and the calls for the forces to come from the sky and the sea were taking place in the ritual. My feelings intensified in parallel. I was having difficulty in concentrating, and I started to sweat. I soon felt that typical sensation that the Daime would be cleansing me. I then decided to react and try to modify the destination of my experience with the forces that I thought were coming to test me. The uneasiness continued. So with eyes closed, I saw the image of an entity which in the vision was associated with the name Eshu, who was, let's say, pestering me and actually disrupting things in my life. The figure had all brown clothes covering his whole body. After a while, feeling effects that seemed like cleansing, nausea in particular, I felt as if a channel had opened. I then felt also a truce in those unpleasant sensations. The channel that had opened, according to the phrase that took shape in my thoughts, was to talk with something that identified itself as a Daime entity's council. When this idea occupied my thoughts, that a spiritual negotiation stopped. I then started to feel better. Another thought came over me. Surprisingly, the entity that was causing my latest sleeps was in fact an Eshu, which is an African-inspired religion, is an entity that someone can commission to disturb the life of someone else because of relational conflicts. Something then caused to open my eyes and return to the session participants. I then saw a young man with a wide eye, tense expression. Another sensation came over me, one of unveiling. The thought that came to me, and interestingly reverberating the native logic, was that the young man who was there was incorporating the entity that was tricksting my life, as the issues used to do. The following day I visited Barquinha, still trying to find out more about the situation of those who left the center. There I found a member I knew. He was kind and willing to talk to me. We talked about my interest in getting permission from Nadir to use the images I had filmed in 2011. He told me I should talk to the medium, but he added that he thought it would be complicated to explain to the entity what I wanted in a consultation. The entities, the pretas velhas, generally communicate, according to him, from an olden times perspective, when they were alive. He argued that maybe Nadir would not understand what it was about. Besides that, when he mentioned this communication difficulty, I thought about how the entity came to the world of the incarnate to help people with problems, with disease, or with difficulties in their relationships. I asked myself if my wish to receive permission to show images at an event would fit into these categories of problems. Now in Barquinha, and waiting the starting of the spiritual work, I saw the same man with this tense face I had seen in the other center, the one who was supposedly the entity's device. According to what I had heard from Daime participants, there could be a principal, a kind of enemy incarnate who had some conflict with me, even if hidden, and was mobilizing spiritual forces to disrupt my life as a reprisal. Surprisingly, he again came to me and began to tell me that my presence at a previous day's meeting had been very important for him, and that he was happy to see me there. He told me that he had been a member of Barquinha and had to leave because he started to get very confused, receiving lots of memories, and he thought it was time to go to another city. There, according to him, he joined another ayahuasca association but couldn't manage to stay, and so returned and was there to receive help. And he asked me to help him in that work. Later, he told me that he had been watching me. Once more, he asked me for help describing in a scattered and unfocused manner the confusing situations he had mentioned, such as saying that he couldn't distinguish between that was for good and that was for ill, and that he had many confused memories about this. The bell rang to indicate that the daime was being served. We looked at each other and went back to the daime table. I joined the queue to receive the daime, waiting for him to come too. To my surprise, he didn't, and I soon understood why he said he was having difficulties. I imagined that he wasn't allowed to take the daime, perhaps because of the problems that he told me about, which could fit the idea of turbação, or a state in which the person behaves erratically, but which did not affect the collective. During the work, a thought came to me that I should tell him the body depends of a lot of air and water to function, and that she should breathe deep and drink water whenever he felt he was becoming confused. When I told him, he remained unmoved and did not show much receptivity. Afterwards, I talked to some of the center's participants. Several people mentioned the situation. I took the opportunity to tell them about my intention to ask Nadir for permission to show the image that I had filmed in 2011, and of my difficulties in finding the people to help me to do so. One person told me that the best thing to do, given the medium I knew was no longer there, was to talk to Madrinha, who, after all, was the person who authorized the entities to work in the center. He told me that Madrinha was like a mother of the family and was the one who broke up the children's fights. And so, on the third day of research, it began to be obvious that a crisis had fallen on Madrinha Center and that perhaps some of the protagonists were among the people I wanted to meet. He also told me that she should know what to tell me. I then asked for a person to ask Madrinha about receiving me, and I resolved to return the next day to see if I could talk to her. In a way, the impacts of this dynamic support the relevance of a family organization among Barquinha participants and evoke their cosmological connections in the form that the African-inspired religions took shape in Brazil. Gonçalves da Silva, in his work on Candomblé and Umbanda, registered this relevance, first in relation to the genesis of these religions in Brazil and the ethnic impact on the organization of the first meeting places, organized by ancestral African links, but also indicating that the consanguinity and common ethnic ancestry gave way to other types of links. He points out, with the passing of time, the Família de Santo, family of saint, group began to lose its ethnic characteristic and began to connect the different meeting places founded through religious links. Hence, a follower, when starting, is born to religious life like the spiritual son of his initiator. So later I went to the center to deliver my work to the people in charge. The Madrinha, hospitable as always, agreed to take care of the material. She talked to me about her struggle. I explained that I had come to told her about the film recording of the event in 2011, how I had asked the permission of the mediums but not Nadir. She told me she didn't know about this film and said that filming was in fact not allowed. I told it hadn't taken place in the church, but she reprimanded me, saying that it applied to any filming. I then noticed that no one had told me I needed to ask her permission. The issue of the prohibition of filming does raise ethical, methodological, epistemological, and political questions that need to be discussed. An important researcher in the field made the following observations in a personal correspondence. This inevitably raises interesting questions in terms of research, such as issues of ethics and informed consent in research. There is a huge discussion on whether anthropologists should have to ask for the written informed consent of their subjects when studying underground and illegal matters, and how pertinent it is that the social science follow this model for biomedical research. In anthropology, field work is a classic tool, and methodology cannot be reduced to a signed piece of paper. Beyond that, anthropology is now progressively taking into account these other voices, further complicating these matters. Do we in fact need to ask the permission of the spirits as well as the informants? So there is no space here for an extensive reflection on the use of the image in contemporary terms, or of all the implications involved with having captured images of Nadir, even if they had taken with the authorization of the mediums and without involving the image of the others. In fact, the image has increasingly become a very relevant expression for the recording of people's experiences, particularly if we look at the use of the internet and social networks nowadays. Some people have an almost compulsive need to take photographs of themselves and others during important life experiences, and also to share these moments with a wide audience, moments which could be considered to be intimate or private by participants in the same context as the image exhibitors. In the case of Barquinha, according to Mercante, the problem of capturing images arises in the in the unwanted situation of participants in spiritual work being compromised by the exhibition of the said image. In other words, the actual act of capturing the image is less relevant than their disclosure, without the ethical concerns involved. My preoccupation is not disclosing images without the full authorization of the people who participate in the 2011 event. The mediums, the center, and the Nadir became an imperative. But going back to my conversation with Madrinha, she told me she would talk to her son, who is the president of the center. I remembered again what I had been thinking about the don'ts that Nadir had come to challenge. It wasn't just any no from mothers and fathers, but particularly those that emerged from some intransigence or insecurity of the adults in which they generally managed and assumed through the social religious life. The connections were extraordinary. There was an entanglement of situations that inhibited me from asking permission from the entity. There were innumerable social equations to be managed. This demonstrates that dynamic that functioned in the Daniel Pereira de Matos lineage was inspired as previously suggested by the same dynamic of the Famílias de Santo, from the Afro-descended religions, in which the leaders were called fathers and mothers of the saint, and therefore treated center participants as sons and daughters of the saint. As a conclusion, I return now to the discussion on kinship relations and the repercussions, thinking of Barquinha as a form of extended family and its consequences. The extended family dynamic in Barquinha seems to have conditioned the initiatives and movements of the people who in 2011 were directly involved with the events that the mediums had organized with the inspiration of Nadir. The mediums concerned with the disagreements and conflicts between adults, mothers, and fathers of these young people and other adults from the community, and the young people prepared, always inspired by the entity, unusual form of work with those young people, and created conditions for the integration in the flow of Barquinha's social life. Thus, as occurs in extended families that have looser intrapersonal ties, these conditions create a feedback mechanism for this flow. On the other hand, and putting the expected effects into perspective, the submission subservience of these young people was framed within the power of the don'ts. From the point of view of the content of the analytical reflection on the events, particularly the partial or full dislocation of people involved in the episode, I find it relevant to think that the alienation of the people brought about the entity's withdrawal from the Barquinha, and as a consequence, the withdrawal of other people from the entity's workspace. As such, we can postulate the idea that a group organizing itself around the work of an entity makes a nuclear spiritual family within the extended family. In this case, the nuclear spiritual family form is placed critically and mutually before this extended family in a characterization of this contribution to the group as a whole. When its exit from the center was provoked, there was a crisis through which a high number of positions shift, and a repositioning takes place that can result in a temporary and permanent withdrawal. What I want to remark here is quite simple. These implications end up composing a system of negotiations in which the activities of the people in the group involve the entities that gather in the nuclear spiritual family. In the case of Nadir's nuclear spiritual family, when conflict negotiation did not end in consensus, the ramification was the reconstruction of a new grouping that became informal, brought about by the dynamic that governs the center to which the medium that incorporated the entity was connected. Regarding the question of permission, it is important to stress that the implication of the system of rules and the dynamic in effect at the time the filming took place led me to consider a type of retroactivity that inhibits me from going ahead with the exhibition of the images. This criterion was reinforced in my attempt to bring the medium that incorporated von Nadir to the Breaking Convention 2015. In this attempt, I requested funding from different agencies to subsidize the medium's travel cost to London, without success. No agency was willing to contribute, alleging, for example, that they only support certain researchers. The analytical consideration of the refusal from these agencies to have programs to encourage and or be willing to support people who on a daily basis build their lives from a connection with a psychoactive sacrament is relevant for this reflection. To an inconclusive end, I feel two frustrations which, while painful for me as a person and researcher, are the ramifications of the connection between social and cosmic events over which I have no control. The first one is that I was not able to present here and give him the opportunity to share his thoughts and horizons. The medium, I believe, implanted a great initiative to promote the fluency of social and cosmic relations in this religious group. My intention was to bring his testimony and to summarize extraordinary and fascinating experiences regarding the use of Daime and ayahuasca from a vivid perspective. The second frustration is that I cannot show the filmed image here because of the various implications considered, the most important of which is that I was hoping that the entities would in some way indicate their willingness to hear me and to give their permission, which could have been here at this meeting. Therefore, I apply a spiritualist principle I have seen many people in the Daime religions applying, which is to hear the world and pay great attention before acting, and this is what I try to do. At last, I learned just a few days ago by a call with the medium who incorporates von Nadir that the Kanban of the entity, a sort of spiritual attendant, consulted her when incorporated as to whether or not she consented to disclosure of the images I mentioned. He told me that von Nadir said that if she did not want the image disclosed, things would not take place to where they actually did. He also told me that from his point of view, he is who embodies the entity, but I am who speaks for her in other language. So my searching is about to finish. Thank you.